Before I share the story of how my world was turned upside down, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you've given so much of yourself to others, your family, your responsibilities, that you've forgotten who you are? It's a lonely feeling, and I know it well. My story is about what happens when you're pushed to the absolute limit, but it's also about the journey back. It's about finding your strength when you feel you have none left. It's that very journey that this book, Coming Back to Myself, 60 Liberating Truths to Find Yourself Again, captures so well. If you've ever felt lost and needed a guide to help you find you again, this could be the very thing you need. Now, let me tell you the story of the day my world shattered. I never imagined my son and his wife would leave me in the cold, but that's exactly what they did when they found out I'd lost everything. The story begins on a Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a bank statement that made no sense. The numbers were gone. Decades of work, of careful saving, of planning for a comfortable old age. All of it had vanished. I was still trying to wrap my mind around it, trying to figure out how I would even begin to fix it when the doorbell rang. It was my son, Norman, and his wife, Frida. My first thought was relief. I assumed they had somehow heard I was in trouble and had come to offer support. Lord knows I needed it. But when I opened the door, their faces weren't soft with concern. They were hard like stone. Victoria, Frida said, not even bothering with hello. She always called me Victoria, never Mom. Come in, I said, trying to pull my robe tighter around me. Can I get you some coffee? We're not staying, Norman said. He stood stiffly in the entryway, looking past me at the living room furniture, at the pictures on the wall, at everything his father and I had built. We know about the money, Victoria, Frida said, her voice sharp. We know you lost your savings. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was going to tell you. I'm still trying to understand it myself. It was a bad investment. I heard my voice quiver. I thought I was being so smart. Frida let out a short, sharp laugh. Smart? Well, your smart decision has left you with nothing, and we're not going to be the ones to clean up this mess. I looked at Norman, my son, the boy I'd raised, the one I'd sat up with when he was sick, the one I'd cheered for at every baseball game. Norman, I whispered, what is she talking about? Norman finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold. Mom, we can't. We can't be dragged down by this. Dragged down? My mind couldn't catch up. I would never ask you for money, Norman. This is my problem to solve. It's already our problem. Frida snapped. We have our own future to think about, our own investments. We can't be associated with this. I stood there in my own hallway, feeling a cold shock of disbelief. It was like being doused with ice water. This wasn't a visit out of concern. This was a confrontation. Then Norman said the words that shattered my world. Mom, we want you out of the house. We're giving you 48 hours to pack your bags and leave. The words hung in the air. Leave. I repeated, my voice barely audible. This is my home. Jack and we bought this house. And you can't afford it anymore. Frida said simply, we don't want to be responsible for what happens when the bank comes. We don't want to deal with your financial troubles. I realized then that they had been distancing themselves for years, and I had just refused to see it, blinded by my hope for family unity. 48 hours, Mom, Norman repeated. We'll be back on Thursday to make sure you're gone. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I felt a betrayal so deep it physically hurt, a pain in my chest that took my breath away. This was my son, my only child. He was telling me to leave my home, to be out on the street in 2 days, because I had lost my money. They didn't wait for a reply. They just turned and walked out, closing the door behind them with a quiet, final click. I stood there in the silence, the echo of their ultimatum filling the room. It was more than just the shock. It was a terrifying, hollow confusion. I had just lost every penny I had to my name, and now I was learning that I had lost more than just money. I'd lost my family, too. This wasn't just a setback. This was the start of a new, painful chapter, and I had no idea what to do next. I don't know how long I stood there in the hallway after the door closed. It could have been minutes or an hour. My legs finally gave out, and I sort of sank onto the little bench by the door, the one my late husband, Jack, had bought at a flea market 30 years ago. My hand was trembling as I reached out and touched the wood. Jack. Oh, Jack. What would he have said? He was always my rock. We built this life from nothing. We bought this house when Norman was just a toddler, and we poured every spare cent and every weekend into making it a home. Jack was the one who taught me about financial planning. Vicky, he'd say, sitting at this same kitchen table with a stack of papers, we're not saving for a rainy day. We're saving for our sunshine days, for our retirement. And we did. We worked hard, both of us. We didn't take fancy vacations. We drove our cars until the wheels practically fell off. We did it all for our future and for Norman. I looked down the hall toward Norman's old room. I could still see him as a little boy, running down that hallway in his pajamas. We gave him everything we could. We paid for his college, helped him with the down payment on his first house, the house he and Frida live in now. We did it gladly. That's what family does. I had so many dreams about growing old in this house. I pictured Christmases with grandkids running around the tree, Sunday dinners where the house was loud and full of laughter. I pictured a comfortable, peaceful retirement, surrounded by my family. That's all I ever wanted. After Jack passed away, I was heartbroken, but I wasn't scared. Not about my future. Anyway, I took over the finances, just like he'd taught me. I was confident. I had our savings. I had the house. I felt secure. I thought I had weathered the worst storm of my life when I lost him, and I'd come out the other side, still standing. I was proud of that. I was proud that I was handling things on my own. I thought I had done everything right. I had worked hard. I had saved. I had invested in my future. I felt secure in the life we had built together. I thought, at my age, that the hard part was over. Sitting there on that bench, the silence of the house felt deafening. All those years of sacrifice, all that planning, all that confidence, it all felt like a joke. The life I'd been so sure of, the stable foundation I thought I was standing on, had just crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. And the part that hurt the most, the part one couldn't wrap my head around, was that the final push came from my own son. The boy I'd raised in this very house. The boy Jack, and I had saved everything for. He was the one who, with just a few cold words, had taken away the last bit of security I had left. My home. I finally pulled myself up from that bench and walked into the kitchen. My hands were still shaking, so I gripped the counter. How did it come to this? It wasn't just one thing. It was a slow drip that I hadn't even noticed until the flood. After Jack died, I was so determined to prove, to myself mostly, that I could handle things. I was proud of taking charge of my finances. I'd managed our accounts for years, but he was always there to double-check. Now, it was just me. I felt I could weather any storm. About 6 months ago, I got an email about an investment opportunity. It looked so professional, so official. It talked about exclusive funds for seniors and guaranteed high returns. I was smart enough to be skeptical at first, but they were persistent in a polite way. I even spoke to a man on the phone, someone who called himself Mr. Harris. He sounded so kind, so understanding. He said he'd helped hundreds of women just like me secure their retirement. Against Jack's old advice of if it sounds too good to be true, it is, I moved a small amount over. And just like they promised, my online account showed a profit. It was impressive. I felt a little thrill. I was good at this. So I moved more. And then, a few months later, I moved the rest. I was so proud of myself, watching that number on the screen grow. I pictured myself telling Norman and Frida at Christmas that I'd actually increased my savings. Then, last week, I went to withdraw a small amount for a property tax bill. The website was gone. Just a white screen with an error message. My calls to Mr. Harris went to a disconnected number. The panic was a cold, sick feeling in my stomach. I spent days calling the bank, calling everyone I could, until a fraud specialist finally told me, in very flat, official language, that the company didn't exist. The money was gone. All of it. I was in shock for days. I didn't know who to tell. I was so ashamed. How could I have been so foolish? I had to tell Norman. The tax bill was due. I called him, my voice breaking, and explained what happened. I wasn't even asking for money. I think I was just scared, and I wanted my son. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. I'll never forget it. There was no, "Oh, Mom, that's terrible." No, "Are you okay?" Just, "How much?" I told him. And then Frida got on the line. Her voice was like ice. "You did what?" "Victoria, how could you be so stupid?" I was so heartbroken by their reaction. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about themselves, about how this would inconvenience them, or what it meant for their inheritance. Looking back, I don't know why I was surprised. They've been distancing themselves for years. The holidays became short, obligatory visits. The phone calls were quick, with Frida always rushing Norman off the phone in the background. But I was blinded by what I wanted. I wanted that happy family I dreamed of. I wanted to believe my son still needed me. I kept making excuses for them, telling myself they were just busy with their own lives. Now, standing in my kitchen with their 48-hour ultimatum ringing in my ears, I finally saw the truth. They hadn't just distanced themselves. They were gone. And they had been gone for a very long time. I just hadn't been willing to see it. I finally sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that Jack always meant to fix. The house was so quiet. It was just me and the ticking of the 48-hour clock Norman and Frida had started. I sat there in the dark for a long time. I didn't turn on any lights. What was the point? My eyes traced the familiar shapes of the room, the cookie jar on the counter, the faded curtains we'd picked out together. This house, it wasn't just walls and a roof. It was my whole life. It was 40 years of memories. This was the kitchen where I'd taught Norman to bake cookies, getting flour all over the floor. This was the living room where Jack and I had danced to our old records on our 25th anniversary. I looked over at his empty armchair. "Oh, Jack," I whispered into the darkness. "What do I do? You were always my rock. You always knew what to do. And now I have no one." The tears finally came. It wasn't a gentle crying. It was a deep body-shaking sob that I couldn't control. I put my head down on the cold kitchen table and just wept. I cried for Jack. I cried for the money I'd been so foolish to lose. But mostly I cried for my son. I cried for the little boy I adored. And I cried for the cold, hard man who had just stood in my hallway and kicked me out of my own home. How does a mother's love lead to this? Where did I go wrong? You spend your entire life sacrificing, giving every piece of yourself to your child. And for what? To be told to pack your bags when you're at your lowest? I felt the full weight of it all. I was old, I was broke, and I was completely, terrifyingly alone. I must have cried for an hour. When the tears finally stopped, I was just empty. I felt hollowed out. I lifted my head and caught my reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. I saw a frightened old woman with red, puffy eyes. And then something else rose up. It wasn't hope. It was anger. A slow, burning anger that started deep in my chest. How dare they? How dare they treat me like this? Like I was a piece of trash to be thrown out. Like my 40 years in this home, my entire life as a mother, meant nothing. I thought of Frida's smug, cold face. I thought of Norman, my own son, unable to even look me in the eye as he destroyed my life. I am more than my bank account. I am more than their burden. I lost my husband. I buried the love of my life. I survived that. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I got up every day. I kept going. I thought back to my own mother. She was a tough woman. She used to say, "You can let it break you, or you can let it make you." I sat up straighter in the chair. This might be a terrible, painful setback, but it doesn't define me. I am Victoria, and I am not done. This wasn't a plan. I still had no idea where I was going to go in 48 hours. I had no money. I had nothing. But in that moment, in the darkest part of the night, I made a decision. I would not let them break me. I would not let them have the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. This might be the end of my life, as I knew it. But it wasn't the end of me. That little bit of anger felt good, but it didn't solve my problem. The clock was ticking. It was now well past midnight, and in 36 hours, I would be homeless. I was still sitting in the dark, my mind racing. I couldn't stay here. But where could I go? A shelter? A motel? I had no money. I couldn't even afford a bus ticket. My anger was a spark, but it wasn't a fire. I needed help. I needed someone. I scrolled through the contacts on my old phone. Most were just numbers, acquaintances. I had no family left to call. And then I saw her name, Ruth. Ruth was an old friend from my church. We weren't as close as we used to be, just a hello on Sundays, but she was a kind, solid woman. A widow like me, she'd understand. My fingers trembled as I pressed the call button. It was so late, but I was desperate. I felt sick with shame. I'd always been the one who had it together, the one who helped with the church bake sales, not the one who needed a handout. The phone rang 3 times, and I was about to hang up when I heard her sleepy voice. "Hello, Ruth? It's Victoria. I'm so sorry to call this late." "Victoria? Goodness, what's wrong? Are you all right?" And just like that, the anger I'd been holding on to crumbled, and I broke down again. The words came tumbling out of me. I told her everything about the investment scam, about how I'd lost every penny. And then, my voice dropping to a whisper, I told her what Norman and Frida had done. I told her I had 48 hours to get out. I expected her to be shocked. I expected her to say, "Oh, Victoria, how could you?" But she didn't. She just listened. There was a long pause on the line when I finished, and I thought for a second she'd hung up. Then she said in the firmest, kindest voice I'd ever heard, "Victoria, you listen to me. Your worth is not defined by the money you lost, and it sure as heck is not defined by the way those ungrateful children treated you. You are a good woman, and you are not alone in this." I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath. I let it out in a gasp. "Now, here's what we're going to do," Ruth said, all business. "I have a spare bedroom. The kids haven't used it in years. It's small, but it's warm and it's clean. You're going to pack a bag, and you're going to come stay with me for as long as you need." "Ruth, I can't ask you to do that." I stammered. "You're not asking. I'm telling," she said. "This isn't the end, Victoria. Maybe this is the chance you need to start over. A life away from that house. and away from them. We talked for a few more minutes, and she told me to come over first thing in the morning. When I hung up the phone, the kitchen was still dark, but it didn't feel as cold. I was still scared. I was still heartbroken, but I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, I started to consider a life beyond this house. A life beyond the family that had thrown me away. Ruth's offer wasn't just a room, it was a foothold. It was the first step on a new path. When the sun came up, I felt exhausted, but I also had a purpose. I had a place to go. I spent that next day, my last 24 hours in that house, in a strange state of contemplation. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I just was. I knew I had to pack, but first I went for a walk through my neighborhood. I ended up at the local park, sitting on a bench where I used to push Norman on the swings. I'd always dreamed of a peaceful retirement, of sitting here with grandchildren. I wondered if that dream was truly dead, or if it just needed to look different. I realized sitting there that I had been holding on to a version of my family that didn't exist anymore. My connection to that house, my hope for Norman, it was all clouding my judgment. It was tying me to a past that was hurting me. Maybe Ruth was right. Maybe this wasn't an end. Maybe it was a chance. When I got back to the house, I went to the closet and pulled out a single suitcase. That was the hardest part. How do you pack 40 years of a life into one bag? I went through my belongings. I found old photographs of Jack and me, a tiny pair of Norman's first baby shoes, mementos from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I held Jack's picture to my chest. I have to go, honey, I whispered, but I'm not letting them break me. I packed my essentials, my clothes, my toiletries, my medications, and a few small pictures. I left everything else. The furniture, the dishes, the collections. I knew I had to let go of the past to have any hope of a future. When my 48 hours were almost up, I called a cab. I stood in the living room one last time, suitcase in hand. The house was silent. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt done. I closed the door, and I didn't lock it. It wasn't my house to lock anymore. Moving into Ruth's spare room was difficult. I felt like a burden, but Ruth wouldn't hear of it. She was kind, but she was practical. She gave me space when I needed to cry and dragged me out for coffee when I needed to talk. While it was a huge change, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, even in my own home. I felt safe. The first few weeks were a blur. With Ruth's help, I applied for every bit of support I could find. I found a local community organization that helped seniors in my situation. It was humbling, but it was necessary. They helped me find a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex across town. It was small, just a fraction of the size of my old house, but it was all mine. I needed to work. I couldn't just sit there. I took a part-time job at the local library, just 20 hours a week, reshelving books and helping people at the desk. It wasn't much money, but it was a reason to get up in the morning. It was a purpose. Slowly, as I adjusted, I started rediscovering myself. I wasn't just Norman's mother or Jack's widow. I was just Victoria. I started volunteering at my new church. I joined a book club at the library. I made new friends. There was Sarah from the apartment down the hall and Mary, who also volunteered. We'd have coffee, go for walks. We talked about our lives, our kids, our pasts. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of a community. I started to realize that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up for you. It's about the connections you choose to make. One day, about a year after I'd moved out, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered it. Mom. It was Norman. My heart stopped. I hadn't heard his voice in 12 months. Hello, Norman, I said. My voice was calm. Even there was a long, awkward pause. Mom, I've been thinking. Frida and I, we're sorry about what happened. His words just felt hollow. There was no real emotion in them. It sounded like something he was saying because he thought he was supposed to. We miss you, he said. We were wondering if you consider, well, maybe we could try to fix things. Maybe you could come back for Sunday dinner. I listened, and I realized that the woman he was talking to wasn't there anymore. The woman who would have done anything for a scrap of his attention, the woman who would have wept with gratitude for this empty invitation. She was gone. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. I just felt resolute. Norman, I said, my voice polite but firm. I appreciate the call, but I'm not interested in dinner. I love you because you're my son, but I am no longer willing to put my happiness in the hands of people who don't appreciate me. There was stunned silence on his end. I don't think he ever expected me to say no. I have to go now, Norman, I said. I'm having friends over for dinner. Goodbye. And I hung up the phone. That night, my little apartment was filled with laughter. Ruth, Sarah, and Mary were all there. I'd made my famous lasagna, and we were crowded around my small dining table, sharing stories. I looked around at these wonderful women at my new, cozy home, and I realized I had finally found what I was always looking for. It wasn't in a big house, or in the family I thought I was supposed to have. It was right here. I'd finally found peace, in my own company, surrounded by people who truly cared. And I was ready for whatever life threw my way next. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it helps someone out there who might be feeling lost or alone. Now, I have to ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you still try to rebuild your relationship with those who've hurt you? Or is it time to move on? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story touched you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Lastly, remember to download this wonderful book called Coming Back to Myself, 60 Liberating Truths to Find Yourself Again. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before on her Kindle Stories. Thank you for being here.